Hey, hey, hey.
So, Rockets fans currently have themselves in a bind. Just a few years ago, they were contending for championships. Then this past season, we saw a whole lot of random faces play for the Houston Rockets that led to a bottom of the NBA season. Then they end up with the number 2 draft pick in the most recent draft lottery. And since then, Rockets fans have been just short of killing each other, trying to decide whether they want to draft Evan Mobley or Jalen Green. And I don't at all claim to be some sort of draft scout expert. I leave that to the other guys on Twitter that I like to follow. But I do understand that both are very good prospects. And from what I understand from, again, the people I follow on Twitter, there seems to be a pretty solid consensus amongst those top 4 players in this upcoming draft. You have Cade Cunningham at number 1, Evan Mobley at number 2, Jalen Green at number 3, and then Jalen Suggs a pretty distinct number 4. So at this point, with the Rockets at the number 2 pick, it's most likely going to go Cade Cunningham number 1 to Detroit, and then they're going to have their option between Evan Mobley and Jalen Green. And this is a classic fit versus talent situation in my opinion, due to the fact that the Rockets already have Christian Wood, who they just signed last offseason, as their starting center. Just last year, he was having a great year, was a frontrunner for the Most Improved Player award until he had the ankle injury that caused him to miss pretty much the entire second half of the season. So because of that, some people are seeing it as Jalen Green, the guard prospect, just being a better fit for the Rockets right now as compared to Evan Mobley, who is another center who would perhaps muddle up the front court with Christian Wood if the Rockets choose to draft him. I also wouldn't be entirely surprised if the people on the Jalen Green side of the argument simply don't trust drafting a big within the top 5 picks of an NBA draft, and I don't really blame them. If we look back over the past 10 drafts in the NBA, there aren't a whole lot of bigs, like true bigs who ended up being a star or even just an all-star level type player that was drafted within the top 5 picks of their respective draft. In 2018, we saw DeAndre Ayton go number 1, and while he's having an amazing postseason right now and very much rising his stock, I think it's also fair to say that he had a whole lot of struggles prior to an all-time great point guard in Chris Paul coming to the Suns and helping him improve his game. In 2015, we had Karl-Anthony Towns, another first overall pick, offensive beast, can do pretty much whatever he wants on the offensive side of the ball, but unfortunately he got stuck in Minnesota. Therefore, I don't quite feel like we've seen his true potential yet, just because he's always been in a pretty bad situation. In 2014, we had Joel Embiid, who this past year was an MVP candidate, amazing season, has had some health issues, but overall hasn't seen a whole lot of success in the playoffs, and even if it's not always his fault, the fact still stands that the Sixers have not really gone as far as they would have liked with Embiid as their star player. And then lastly, in 2012, we had Anthony Davis, who, much like Karl-Anthony Towns, was in just a very terrible situation in New Orleans to start his career. Then we saw him force a trade over to LeBron and the Lakers, where he ended up winning a ring. And just for reference, to show that it is not at all a small sample size that this was chosen from, here is every other top 5 draft pick that was a big over the past 10 years. We have Enes Kanter, Tristan Thompson, Jonas Valanciunas, Thomas Robinson, that one's a real throwback, Anthony Bennett, Cody Zeller, Alex Len, Jahlil Okafor, Kristaps Porzingis. Yes, I'm going to put him on this list just because I don't know what Kristaps is right now. Dragon Bender, Marvin Bagley, Jaren Jackson Jr., and James Wiseman. A few of those last few names, even Marvin Bagley, I'll throw him in there, but those guys are obviously still young. They have plenty of time to still develop and grow. Just as of now, I wouldn't be too surprised if none of them made an all-star team. Jaren Jackson Jr., I hope will make one at some point, but again, they're early in their careers. I'm not trying to throw them on a slander list this early. But to get back to the Rockets, I think all those names I just listed may plant a seed in fans or even just the Rockets front office's heads that Evan Mobley at number 2 might be a scarier thing. They might think it's a scarier thing than it really is. Because from what I've heard, Evan Mobley is totally worth that second overall pick. He is pretty much the perfect mold for a modern center in today's NBA. He can defend almost every position. He can handle the ball a little bit. He even has a little bit of shooting to him that we might see progress year after year. But I'm officially here to take my stance and say that drafting for fit is an absolute myth and should no longer be a thing. Most teams picking early on in the draft are nowhere near a contending stage, and at that point are just trying to acquire as much talent as possible. So again, for most teams, there's not really a whole fit aspect, but when there is a fit versus talent aspect, you should always pick on the talent side. Because for some reason, I feel like a lot of fans have this thought process in their head that, let's say that there is a team that has the ability to draft for a specific fit. Maybe they were a contending team and they had an earlier trade a few years ago that gave them a top 10 pick in the upcoming draft. And let's say this team is just a little short on wing depth. So for some reason in my head, I feel like fans of that team see they need wing depth, they have a top 10 pick, and they think that just by drafting the best wing prospect available rather than taking the best prospect available will somehow help their team more in a win now scenario than, again, if they just took the most talented player available. And I say this because it is so very rare for a player to come into their first year, most of them their second year, and even some of them their third year, and have a huge impact on a contending team. Even just recently, we've seen two pretty generational talents in Luka and Zion get drafted, and even those guys, Luka, I would say, wasn't really specifically a star player until maybe like the bubble of last season or early on in this season. And then Zion, I don't even think I'd call Zion a star player quite yet. He's still really, really young. I think he's entering his third year now. He probably will hit that point soon, but again, he's still not a star player. He's not willing his team to contention, and again, he's 3 years in now. So my question is, if you're trying to win now, why would you use that draft pick to draft for fit rather than actually addressing the fit and getting someone who is a proven NBA player who could play that same position, whether it be free agency or by trade? Because by also just taking the more talented player overall, then you just have more talent on your team that you could then go out and use for those trades that I just mentioned. And obviously this comes with the caveat that, not every pick is going to pan out and go play at their full potential. You still might miss on some players, and that's okay. But again, just the idea of drafting talent over fit is a necessity. And before I end the video, I did want to go into some examples just so I could, help explain what I mean by this in case I didn't get my point across clearly, because I could definitely see a case where that did not happen. So first, let's go back to last year's draft. We have the Warriors, who have the second overall pick. Prior to that draft, I thought LaMelo was right up there with Anthony Edwards as the potential best prospect in the draft. I definitely thought that LaMelo was a better prospect than James Wiseman, but again, enter the Warriors with the second overall pick. Because of the fact they already had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, although he was injured, and Andre Wiggins all on the roster, they felt that they wanted to get a center that could branch them into their future of, playing after Curry, Klay, all those guys. So they pass on LaMelo and they draft James Wiseman instead. Now fast forward to the end of the season, and obviously James Wiseman did not have a great year, and I don't want to slander James Wiseman like I said earlier. He barely played in college. He played a few games before he left after the whole incident with the getting paid, all that stuff. Who cares at this point? But then he got no training camp, no preseason, was out for most of his first season with an injury. But the point still stands that LaMelo was an absolute X factor in Charlotte. They were in the playoff race, not even just the play-in race. They were in the playoff race pretty deep into the season until both LaMelo and Gordon Hayward got hurt for the remainder of the season. I was an advocate for LaMelo to Golden State at the time of the draft and was a little upset that it didn't happen because, again, the Warriors, they went for fit over talent. They took Wiseman because they thought they needed a center, when in reality, now we just get to look back and think about what could have been in a lineup with Steph Curry, LaMelo, at least for this season, Andrew Wiggins. We'd have to wait for Klay Thompson, but again, I think it would have been a really, really fun and exciting team to watch. And then going back to the 2018 draft, we had DeAndre Ayton go number 1, Marvin Bagley go number 2, and then Luka Doncic go number 3, even though it was technically 5, but the whole trade thing, it's, you get what I mean. And I understand that some people were scared of taking a European player that high in the draft just because there had been a whole lot of misses since the good makes in like the early 2000s. But even as someone who personally didn't really follow the NBA that close back in 2018, I've grown sense. Good thing I have, but I've grown sense. Even I knew that Luka was clearly the most talented player in this draft. I mean, I barely watched anything, like I mostly even highlights, but it was so easy to tell me that Luka was going to be just such a good player in the NBA. Yet both the Suns and the Kings opted to choose bigs in front of him, And also due to the fact that the Suns obviously had Devin Booker at the time, who was their franchise cornerstone player. And then there's the same thing in Sacramento. They had De'Aaron Fox, who was improving into the star player that he will soon become in the coming years. But again, it was another case where they already had a pretty ball-dominant point guard, and they didn't want to bring on Luka Doncic because they thought there might have been a clash or something. And in the Suns' case, I don't really want to go at them too hard because they are in an NBA Finals right now. They made it despite drafting Ayton over Luka, and so I feel like they've saved themselves from most of the slander over that pick. But still, just take a second. Imagine a Luka Devin Booker backcourt. They wouldn't have Ayton obviously, but they can just go get some Joe Schmo center off free agency. But just let that marinate for a little bit. Just think about that. Luka and Booker in the same backcourt. But the Kings, on the other hand, don't even get me started with the Kings. But if they'd taken Luka over Bagley, there's a pretty solid chance that they're not still one of the worst franchises in the NBA currently. But at the same time, I wouldn't at all be shocked if they somehow found a way to mess it up and traded him or just got him to want to leave the team or something like that in true Kings fashion, because I just wouldn't be surprised. But again, the point stands. Luka was the most talented player. Even if the Suns are doing really good and the Kings are doing really bad, I still to this day believe that they should have taken Luka over the bigs that they chose to fit their team better. And then one last example I want to throw out there quickly, a little bit of a throwback where we can actually see some valid results. But let's go back to 1997 real quick. We had the San Antonio Spurs. Star player David Robinson misses all but 6 games in the season. Spurs finished dead last, and they are awarded the #1 pick for it, with a healthy David Robinson coming back to the next season as well. So they use that pick and draft another center in Tim Duncan. And while I completely understand that the mindset and play style of the NBA was a whole lot different back then, you could get away with running 2 big lineups for the most part, especially when they are as talented as David Robinson and Tim Duncan. But once again, the point stands. They could have easily gone out and drafted Keith Van Horn or Chauncey Billups, picks 2 and 3 in that draft, 2 guards who were probably, I don't want to say they definitely weren't a better prospect than Tim Duncan, but I mean, they were top picks. They probably were talked about at some point to be the #1 pick. But instead, the Spurs went with the surefire talent. They took Tim Duncan at center, despite already having all-star David Robinson at center, and they absolutely prospered because of it. A brief reminder, too, that rookie Tim Duncan was one of those special rookies I was talking about. He immediately came in and averaged 21 and 12 with 2.5 blocks per game as a rookie. But anyway, not only does Tim Duncan win a ring with the Spurs in his second year, but then he also goes on to win 4 more as his career went on. So with those examples out of the way, again, I'm officially taking my stance on this, and we'll see from here on out where I go with it. There's always a chance I switch it up at some point, but so again, I'm officially saying it. Drafting for fit is dumb. Drafting for talent is the way of the future in the NBA. Therefore, the Rockets should take Evan Mobley in this year's draft, and not Jalen Green, even though they're both very qualified players and very much deserving of the 2nd overall pick. But the Rockets should take the talent in Evan Mobley.